Hey everyone, it's May 29th, 2016, and this is your At Percussion episode 46. I'm Casey Cangelosi, and over there is Ben Charles.
Hi everybody.
And Megan Arns.
Hi.
And this is Laurel Black.
Hi.
So with us today is award-winning composer and assistant professor of composition at the University of South Florida. He is internationally commissioned and widely performed. He holds many prizes, honors, and recognitions from notable institutions, including, check out this insane amount of acronyms I'm about to do, the Percussive Art Society, that's an easy one, the Music Teachers National Association, the Society for Electroacoustic Music in the United States, the National Association of Composers in the United States, and ASCAP, which is American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. So hello and welcome to Mr. Baljinder Sekhon. How's it going?
Hi, thank you. It's going great.
So you're joining us from Florida. What's happening? You're a composer and you're always working on pieces. I saw you were just in Knoxville, where Laurel and I happened to be for this episode, and you had a piece premiered.
That's right. I had a piece, it wasn't a premiere, but I had a performance of a piece called Gradient. It's a piece for saxophone and piano, and this was at the National Association of Composers National Conference, which was held at UT in Knoxville. And so I was there for about 4 days. My piece was on the last concert. This piece is from, I think, 2008, maybe 2009, but it was really a piece that was the beginning of an exploration for me dealing with timbre and the relationship between pitch and time. And so this was really a piece that was kind of groundbreaking for me in my own compositional thought and direction. And so this particular piece uses lots of extended techniques on the saxophone and combines it with various preparations on the piano in an effort to bring the two sound worlds of the instruments closer together. And so what happens is it creates a sort of spectrum of timbre where the various possible timbres for each instrument reside on the spectrum, and they sort of move their way through it. And then it also explores the two separate spectrum of timbre from each instrument and the differences between the instruments. So this is a duo piece that highlights and explores the differences and the possible similarities between the timbres of saxophone and percussion, which happen to be the two instrumental families I composed the most for.
So you were talking about your piece Gradient, and then I know you also have a piece called Gradient 2.0. How are those related?
Well, those are very related. So Gradient was a piece that after I composed it, it was premiered by a saxophonist named Robert Young, who had commissioned it. This was in 2008, and about a year went by, no one played the piece. Nothing happened with it. People seemed disinterested, and then a couple of people picked it up and started playing it. One was Doug O'Connor, who's become a longtime collaborator of mine, a saxophonist. And Doug played this piece all over the place, and other people started playing it, and it really became the first piece of mine that was widely played, and still is. And this sort of taps into something else, which is there's a series of pieces I've been writing, which are for solo instrument and percussion ensemble, sort of like a series of concerti. And Doug had been playing the piano version of this piece for a while. He had got a gig teaching at University of Wisconsin in Eau Claire, and asked me to write a new version of this piece for saxophone and percussion ensemble, replacing the prepared piano with a percussion ensemble. So I did this piece. So Gradient 2.0 is a revision of the original Gradient that's written for sax and percussion ensemble. Actually, the saxophone part's exactly the same, which is great. It allows saxophonists to go between playing it with percussion ensemble or piano. And the percussion ensemble part, I'd say it's a lot busier than the piano part. Maybe not busier, but there's more variation on color and timbre that's possible there, because I was still tapping into that same idea of trying to explore the various timbre possible between the saxophone and this time with percussion. And so I was able to bring a lot more instruments, a lot more materials into the piece when I did it for percussion to give a wider spectrum of timbre. And so while we were emailing back and forth, Doug and I, and Jeff Crowell, who was the percussion director that was premiering this piece with Doug, the email subjects were always Gradient 2.0 because I hadn't come up with a title for the piece yet. And, in any case, I never came up with a new title for the piece, so the joke of it being called Gradient 2.0 just stayed. So now we joke about Gradient 3.0 for band and saxophone, where the saxophone part's still the same part. I'll just write this piece the rest of my life.
That's what Keiko Abe does.
Yeah.
Megan's going to be in an important exam, and she's going to say density 2.0, and not.
Dang it!
Dang it! That's the other.
Hey, could be on the comps. You never know.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Hey, this is the piece a vibraphone player has to use some cool like slap mallets, right?
Yeah. The marimba player used slap mallets in this piece, and that replaces in the piano part. There were books placed on the lower register of the piano, which gave a sort of slap tongue sort of effect. I mean, you know what that sounds like. And so to get that sort of percussive slap sound from the marimba, that's the piece where they use the slap mallets to get that sort of articulation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it also uses like a suspended paper bag, and we found out the carry-out bag from Macaroni Grill is the best carry-out bag to hang from the cymbal stand, and that's a really nice sound that blends with this closed slap tonguing technique and key bats, sort of like this ticky sound. And so we've, one of the things that I got to do when I did the percussion version was I got to explore a lot more possibilities for getting the colors to mix with the saxophone.
Macaroni Grill and say, I'm sorry, can I have a stack of those bags? Just test your luck.
I think
I just they're like plastic. Sometimes some places have plastic chopsticks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like those work really well for something. So I was just at a Vietnamese place last week, and I would like slipped all of these into my purse.
Yeah.
They're the heavy ones.
That's funny. Let me grab some.
Megan, I also feel like the pure silver.
Yeah, I was just in New York a while ago and go to K-Town and look for chopsticks. So I just got this nice package of chopsticks here.
Nice.
Actually, my piece that Ben's group recently played, the whole beginning of it is chopsticks on the steel drum. So I'm always looking for the ones with a nice weight and that won't destroy the instrument.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I actually had a question kind of pertaining to that. Well, first of all, the piece he's talking about is called Passageways, which is, I guess, probably in the same series. It's for solo steel drum plus percussion ensemble. There's 5 parts, but they can be divided up into a mallet instrument and percussion between 2 players, so you can do it with 5 people as is originally written, or up to 10 people if you divide the parts. But anyway, the piece begins with the steel pan, as he said, playing with chopsticks, which I know is also a sound that Andy Akiho is a big fan of. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you and Andy went to school together, is that right?
That's right, yep.
And then could you tell me about, have you bounced ideas back and forth, and like have you guys, would you say, influenced each other at all?
Well, you played in his group too, right?
That's right. Yeah, I would say.
Ben.
Yeah, that's right. No, I hate Andy Akiho. No, Andy has been a long-time friend of mine, and we talk very regularly. I played in his group. In fact, the first piece that I wrote that incorporated steel drum, well, there was 2 at the beginning. One was for steel pan and tape, and Andy played it at the Stone in New York City. And another one was a piece for gamelan ensemble and steel band. And Andy came to Rochester, and we premiered it at Eastman with the gamelan group there. And and that was really before he was composing lots of music, but it was before he went to Manhattan School and to Yale. And so I've been collaborating with him for a long time. We were roommates together, and I learned most of what I know about steel drum from him. He had been playing for so long, and I remember I used to wake up in the morning and hear this guy practicing all the time. He'd practice all day, and of course he's a total virtuoso on the instrument. Ultimately, I ended up playing in a group with him. There was a piece called Alloy that uses chopsticks on the steel pan, and he's got several other pieces, and that's sort of where I picked that up from doing it with Andy and his group. But as far as compositionally, I mean, our music sounds a lot different. We're different people with different experiences, and I love his music, and I think that he at least kind of likes mine. So we certainly talk a lot on the phone about what we're working on, and bounce ideas off each other, piece titles to instrumentation and so forth. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Does that group, is that group called Foundry, and does it still exist? I thought I saw something recently that of a concert.
Foundry exists in the abstract.
Yeah.
I think the name for that group has been used for lots of other groups that Andy's formed. They're always called Foundry. It could be a chamber ensemble. It could be a large steel band, a junk metal band. So I'm not really sure what the deal with the name of the group is, but it seems to always be existing in one form or the other.
Yeah, that's funny. Cool.
So I bumped into something of a compositional topic this week. They were actually presenting it on my favorite podcast out there to listen to, which is called The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, and it's a project called the Next Rembrandt. So these scientists, they basically have taken all this computer technology and cameras, and they've created algorithms that measure and replicate Rembrandt's techniques. So they make this huge database of information measuring like the distances from mouth widths to nostrils to eyes and all these things, and they replicate the Rembrandt-esque techniques, and they've recreated a painting. So let me just read you guys a little bit, and you should totally check out this video. It's real well done. It's real short. It's 5 minutes long. It's called The Next Rembrandt. You'll be tripping over it on YouTube. I'm sure some of you have already seen it. But backed by ING and Microsoft, technicians and art historians created an extensive database from the 346 known Rembrandt paintings. A facial recognition algorithm identified and classified the most typical geometric patterns used by Rembrandt to paint human features. It then used and learned principles to replicate the style and generate new facial features for the painting. With the help from the Delft University of Technology in Holland, a height map is created to identify patterns on the surface of the canvas. So this is for brushstroke, because they make a big point that the painting is actually three-dimensional. So by transforming pixel data into height data, the computer could mimic the brushstrokes used by Rembrandt. Finally, to bring the painting to life, an advanced 3D printer that is specially designed to make high-end reproductions of existing artwork was used. In the end, 13 layers of UV ink were printed, one on top of the other, to create a realistic painting texture. So what I want to do right now is just show you guys a quick selection of Rembrandt's, just some portraits. So hopefully you guys can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that is a Rembrandt.
Wow.
That is a Rembrandt. All right, so these are his famous portraits, and I'll scooch along here to the one that the computer created. Oops.
Nope, is that Casey?
I'm just wearing a hat. Hey guys. So this is the one the computer created using all the information gathered from the other paintings. And when I saw it, I was really blown away. It's like, wow, it looks incredibly good. So just with this facial recognition software and generating these algorithms of figuring out his techniques, they were able to do this. And it amazes me because it only took them 18 months. They were able to do this. And in a way, I was kind of like, wow, it's almost depressing. Like they can imitate this guy's whole lifetime of work.
Right.
In 18 months. And in science terms, 18 months is nothing. That's a fun sabbatical project, you know.
Right.
Yeah, that's a fun little side project. So I also wanted to pair this with David Cope's work. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of composer David Cope.
Yeah.
So he's been doing this for long before this with music. So David Cope is a composer in California, and he's created 2 computer artificial algorithms called Emmy, and later he created one called Emily Howell, and there's all these recordings online of replications of Bach, Vivaldi, Beethoven. I think he's pretty much figured out in his second one, Emily Howell, how to imitate anything. So what do you guys think of that? And again, just like the Rembrandt is totally stunning, if you listen to some of his Bach replications, they sound like Bach. The Mozarts sound like Mozart. I mean, they sound very, very good. It totally sounds like an undiscovered Mozart piece. So I guess it leads to a couple questions and hopefully like a little interesting controversy about composition and creativity. What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, if I could butt in, I I haven't ever heard it, but I've heard of like the Bach thing, which I think that if there's anyone that would be totally easy to like rip off and replicate, it would be Bach, just because his music is based so much on literally mathematical structure, whereas the paintings are, I think, even more interesting because it's not. I guess there's proportions and things at stake, but it's not necessarily a mathematical equation like Bach. Um, but it's interesting to me because when I look at Rembrandt, these are basically photorealistic paintings. Um, and in my opinion, and I'd like to hear Baljinder's opinion on this too, ever since photography was invented, there's almost no point in trying to create a photorealistic painting because a photograph can always do that better than you. And I was watching a documentary yesterday on Netflix actually called Chef's Table, and the first episode of the second season is about this restaurant in Chicago called Alinea, and the chef of Alinea, his name is Grant Atchats, and he says, I could give you a tomato and a piece of bread, and it would be delicious, but then you would ask me, why are you charging me $500 for a tomato and a piece of bread? Why, like, I need to figure out how to make that into something unique and different and a new experience. So a lot of the time, like, I think, elderly folk will say, like, I can't stand like modern contemporary music because it's all just noise. Why can't they write something that sounds like Beethoven? It's like, well, because Beethoven wrote something that sounds like Beethoven, so if I do that, I'm just a second-rate Beethoven. Why do we need to continue to do that? So yeah, I think there's all sorts of interesting artistic implications to, if you can make a formula about something and duplicate it, then why is it worth pursuing as a human being? And maybe this is what John Cage was getting at with a lot of his stuff. But anyway, I've talked for too long. I'd like to hear from Baljinder about the topic.
Sure. Well, I mean, I have a lot that I could say about this. One is that it's not surprising that the computer was able to do this. I mean, of course, there's an algorithm that's being developed as the various Rembrandts are analyzed, and it's being sort of boiled down to a general Rembrandt system, the algorithm the computer's learning. So the computer is basically creating the product of a combination of what it's observed in all the other works that it looked at. What would be interesting, and by the way, I'd say that that's not really how we work as humans, so it's interesting to see a computer do that, because if you were to take a human who had never heard any music before and only play them Bach for 5 years or 2 months, and then have them create a piece of music, it would sound like Bach. I'm assuming they would try to replicate what they think it's supposed to sound like. So we don't have any cases where that happens. I mean, with the computer, with Rembrandt, what would be interesting is if they showed the computer Rembrandt and Picasso and then had it create something that that's the result of its combination of observations from those two painters, or Rembrandt, Picasso, Dali, and Jackson Pollock, and then see what it creates. What is the combination of those four paintings? I mean, in some ways, the computer creating a system based on what it observed in Rembrandt is almost like it having a favorite painter. Like Rembrandt is its favorite painter, and maybe it observes a little bit of Picasso and a little bit of Dali, and what happens is its output tends to be kind of leaning towards being Rembrandt, but there's little twists on it. And I think that's, in a much more complicated way, how we work with creativity. So one thing I tell my students is, that they need to be listening to and experiencing on a deep level as much different music as possible, because what happens is that algorithm that they're creating, the more that they take in various art, that algorithm is becoming more diverse, and what's likely to come out of them is something that's seemingly more unique. So someone like John Cage, it's not surprising that his music was the way that it is, because we know that John Cage was heavily involved in visual art, that John Gage was heavily involved in a variety of experimental musics, but also a collaborator with dance. So the result of John Cage's music is much different than the result of a composer who is primarily living in the orchestral music world and listening to a lot of romantic music and maybe neoclassical music, and then they go write an orchestra piece. So I think it's really interesting that taking that computer example with Rembrandt and thinking about how that applies to the way that we work and why composers or artists or dancers have the seemingly very unique output that they have is because that set of experiences of observations that they have come together in a totally different way for each person.
I had a quick question about something you said. A few weeks ago we had Zach Browning on, also a composer, and he was talking about, he said now students will come in with a piece they've written and they'll pop in the CD and they'll say, here's the MIDI playback, here's what it sounds like. And he said, I don't like that because then I'm perceiving it as a listener, not as a composer. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about having your students experience as many different composers, genres, mm-hmm. types of music as possible. Do you encourage students, I mean, obviously any way they can get it is good, but do you encourage them like only to study scores and try and figure out what's going on that way, or listen, or like is there any, I mean, I don't think there's a wrong answer here, but do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of all of that: listening, studying scores, and reading. Reading books by composers, books about composers, interviews with composers. The more that a certain composer, maybe Feldman has this book, Give My Regards to 8th Street, which is fantastic, and it's very opinionated, and there's all kinds of information in here. And when a student reads through that book maybe a couple of times, that thought, that perspective starts to become a part of them. It's something that they understand. They may not agree, but it starts to become a part of them like anything else. And so the way that I think about that is like it's all becoming part of their intuition. Their intuitive spectrum is growing, and so when they write intuitively, when you think you're improvising, you're recalling and recomposing all of the experiences that you've had, musical experiences and otherwise, and things that improvisers tend to produce material that's similar to what they've done a lot of in the past. There are these text pieces by Stockhausen that are just text-based instructions that are basically telling the instrumentalist what to do, and there's one of them that's the instructions are something like, and I can't really even paraphrase it, but do nothing, clear your mind. When you're not thinking at all, then start to play. And that's kind of a silly idea in some respect, because to improvise is to be very active and be thinking about everything that you're that you're putting it together in a meaningful and thoughtful way. So as far as the spectrum goes, I mean, one thing that I think of is like there's a light spectrum that we can see. There's a light spectrum, and there are light waves on that spectrum that we can see, and it goes from basically red to violet. But there are other light waves that we can't see on the other side of that spectrum. On either side, there's stuff that's there and we can't see it. And so a student or a composer or anyone, a professional's creative spectrum is the things that they're able to choose from, the colors that are there. And the more things that you experience, that spectrum grows and grows. And so unlike the light spectrum where you physically can't see beyond red or violet, or maybe red's on this side, red or violet, then the creative spectrum is the spectrum of your own intuition that constantly grows throughout your life to the point where you can't see where it ends. And the problem with younger composers is usually that they're hitting the part that where it ends. They're running into a dead end, and they can only do these couple of things. And so that's a really interesting thing to me with my students, is to have that, see how wide we can make that spectrum in the time that I have with them. Then there's a matter of organizing all that stuff, to knowing when it's appropriate to take from here or there, or that you mix these two things together. So, yeah, I don't know. I think the way that we develop our ability to be creative depends on how much art we take all the time.
So Ben made a little joke in the text feed, but I'll tell you, David Cope, when he makes these algorithms to generate Bach or Vivaldi, he also put his own music into the system, and the computer can really do anything. I mean, it can really make anything in any style. And like Baljinder was saying earlier, sure, if you could give it a demonstration of multiple styles, it could do it. He even got the same computer to play a character in a novel he wrote. So his computer construct, Emily Howell, played a character in one of his novels named Emily Howell, and every line that that character spoke, he used the computer to generate. So of course he had to feed it information, but whatever information you feed it, it will turn out. So I guess it's possible. You get a commission, you don't have time to do it, but you've put enough of your own information through the system, and you push go, and the computer cranks out a piece, and you look it over and you go, oh yeah, that's okay, let's do another one, crank it out, and then you pick one that you like. So
it's like your own little bitch Stewie or something.
Yeah. So my question is, like, who wrote that piece? You know, did you write that piece?
Yeah.
It's all your techniques, it's all your methods, and I'm telling you, go listen to his Vivaldi. It sounds like Vivaldi. It really does. Go listen to his Mozart. It sounds like Mozart.
We actually have an example of this in those intermediate masterworks for marimba.
Oh yeah, the running
was Nancy
mouse.
Zelsman big project. Yeah, Mouse Running by Andreessen. He just created a program that creates a different string of single notes going from one end of the keyboard to the other, like a mouse running. And so it's printed. The score of it is, here's the website, type this in to get your version of this piece. So the deal is everybody gets their own individual version of mouse running, but the other thing is like, well, you didn't actually write anything, and I mean, did you just get paid like $2,500 to?
But yet he created a whole system.
Yeah,
so
and
it's clearly he did a lot of work and invented something.
Well, you assume he created the system.
Right.
Well,
I would assume he's creating a set of rules, which is really what any composer is doing. I mean, especially when we talked about Zach Browning a minute ago. I mean, Zach's music, to me, when he explains it, it's like it's like almost like, oh, so you just came up with a computer program sort of in your head and executed it. I mean, it falls strictly within sets of rules of this is this many beats long. Or I mean, look at third construction. I mean, it's like, you know, you've got all the sections that it's this many beats long, and you know the phrases work this way. I mean, so you know the set of rules could have a very specific output like a Bach chorale, or it could have a more general output like mouse running.
Yeah, I think that, and there's several things I'd like to add here. One is that creating the set of rules, I'll call it a system. So developing the compositional system is really the work of the composer. I mean, that is composing in my view. That some people call, you know, pre-compositional planning, but it's not really pre-composition. That's composing. That's doing the composing. You know, notating is something different. You know, writing it on the staves is perhaps notating it out, but all that's part of composition, coming up with the system. It's sort of like the blueprint, maybe. Now, as far as to answer Casey's question of who, you know, did you really compose that, or is that really your piece, or something like that? I'd say the answer is yes. And I had a talk with Joel Chatterby who once about this, and he has a series of pieces called Many Times that are pieces that are for computer and performer, but there's no score, there's not even written instructions. The piece is that the performer does whatever they want to do. And his answer to that is that when people ask me, well, what did you compose? Why is that yours? And his answer is that, well, I composed an opportunity for this to happen. You know, that just by creating the opportunity, I wrote the piece. Whatever happens within the framework of the piece is my composition, because this is my idea. And the same thing goes for something like 433, you know, John Cage's piece.
Yeah, well, and the success of a piece like that, we talked about this a lot, relies with the performer then, do you think?
With not 433, but...
Not 433, but if there's a piece that, like, just presents an opportunity, it's a cool idea, but,
right.
like, its success depends on how good that performer is.
Well, and I think that's what's cool about putting, you know, when I heard about this Rembrandt thing, it was like, oh, it made all this controversy, and of course my thought was, well, musicians have been, like this David Cope dude has been doing this for a long time. Like his textbook um, shoot, something, the Emmy, the EMMY book, but it's an old book, you know. It's like, yeah, we're not that surprised, as none of us here today are that surprised. Like, yeah, of course it's all measurement and number. Why couldn't a computer do that? But I think putting the two side by side, and maybe one of the reasons it doesn't bother us nearly as much as it might bother some artists, I think in general it doesn't bother artists, but it definitely bothers some, is that ours is a performing art and theirs is a plastic art, so you're never going to take away the performing element and the performing aspect of ours. So it's like, I don't know, we kind of feel a little safer because they can never truly take our entire thing away. But I guess I want to just make another question. So let's say that these guys who made this Rembrandt project, their motivations are not clear by the video. I don't know what they're doing, and I don't know to what end they were after this project. So if they were to just start cranking out Rembrandts like every day, a new Rembrandt, would that rub you guys the wrong way?
I mean, I don't think they're cranking out Rembrandts to try and like sell them off as authentic Rembrandts, you know what I mean? And like, even if you can make a painting that's just like Rembrandt, like a computer painting it isn't the same as you and me painting it. You know, I think it's different.
Yeah.
I think the whole conversation that we just had about these process pieces, or pieces where the composer is creating the process or the computer program or the formula or whatever, kind of lies in between all of this, you know. And I think, you know, from a performer standpoint, you could talk about the use of electronic instruments on Broadway or something, for example. So you're taking away that human element, or in front ensembles of the whole marching world, or, you know, in many different aspects of performance. And I think, I don't know, I think that we have to embrace that in a way, and I think all of those pieces are just a part of that as well, and it almost serves as like a middle ground. And I think I mean, it's not going away. The technology is not going away. These processes are, you know, that concept will always exist. But I think by taking that and adding the humanistic element to it, kind of what Laurel said, well, doesn't that often depend on the performer? Definitely. I think a lot of the times it depends on the performer, but also for like a totally human composed, no process piece, you know. So I don't know. I think
that's one thing I thought of is, like, Laurel's like, I think that kind of piece depends on the performer. It's like, well, but so does any piece. I mean,
yeah,
right, but
I think any
don't
piece does
that until we start to question the value of something, right?
Yeah, but like,
nobody's questioning the value of a Beethoven piano sonata, but like, when it's this piece where the composer just made this process, then we're questioning the value, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've always had this this idea that if I was ever a brilliant composer and I was teaching a composition class, which will probably never happen, but if I was, I would like to take like a Bach chorale and say, okay, I would like you to notate this in a way that could result in this exact, you know, what already exists being performed, or it could result in something else. Like, create a notation system that's ambiguous enough it could create these sounds coming out, but also it could create something else, and then try and find, does that make sense? Like, try and find what else could be, could come out of a notation system, you know?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and like, what directions could have history led, right? I've been thinking about that a lot in studying for comps. It's like, you know, there's so much stuff that was happening, but how do we decide the canon? How do we choose what? And a lot of times it's just like what was found. So there might have been other things that existed, and like these other pathways and avenues of creativity that were just lost because we didn't find them.
Non-Curl is a great example of that. Like we talked about with Alejandro Viñao, like Non-Curl was a composer that was doing all sorts of crazy things and almost completely slipped by the radar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totes.
Well, you know, like Ben said, and I've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson say the same thing. He uses the Starry Night, the Van Gogh, as an example. He says this came around, you know, development of photography is so prevalent and becoming such an art form now that painting just a realistic representation was kind of irrelevant. It, of course, showed your talent and your ability, but it wasn't about just, you know, I don't know, technical precision anymore. So people started exploring out of it. And I don't know, just imagine, like, what if Finale and Sibelius had a plugin like generate 40 measures of Bach-sounding stuff? Of course, I think the utility would be, say, like film scores, and people making music that they don't want to mess with copyright or asking permission. I mean, how many times does it happen where a director is saying, hey, I really love this Holst, the planets, you know, write me something like that. We can't pay for asking for permission. And they just go, oh, bam, and they put Holst into the machine, and out cranks Holst that isn't Holst. So I don't know. I thought it was interesting. I have to say, when you do look at the Rembrandt they created, aside from just like the overall aesthetic being totally spot on, if you and I can't tell if this is because I know it's the fake or what, but if you look really closely, I feel like there's always this emotional complexity in the original Rembrandts, and you guys will just have to tell me if you think I could be totally wrong about this. Let me find it real quick here. I feel like it's missing that complexity in this face. So this is the computer-generated one, and if you look at, say, you can almost take any of them. I feel like there's multiple layers of emotion. I know it's probably really cheesy to say,
Wait, this
but
is generated right now?
yeah, so this is a Rembrandt, and he kind of looks, I don't know, a little irritated, a little apprehensive, and a little bummed out all at the same time. And that's what they say, like, Rembrandt's thing was. He was able to convey this, like, complex layer of emotion very accurately. And I feel like you see that in all of them. Like, there's this little bit of cockiness here, and this also little bit of, I don't know, anxiety or angst. There's always two, I feel like, and I just am not sure what the two is in this one. So I don't know. And again, that might be because I can't, you know, separate knowing that this one is the machine and the other one is not. But as I've looked at them,
like
that,
blind taste.
right, it would have been nice to do like a nice blind test. But I really do see that, like, in these guys' faces, they have that emotion that lies right between upset, angry, and kind of feeling, I don't know, you know, those emotions that lie between the cracks of the ones we have words for. I just don't know if I see that in the main one. So.
Yeah, and reading through the comments on the video that you sent, Casey, is really interesting. I mean, there's some interesting conversations happening, and one of them is, you know, what's the point? The result is a lifeless portrait that lacks character, you know, leading to an interesting discussion of someone who is an artist saying it's lifeless means you're not understanding the art or the work of artists and the true connection that those who understand art, well, that's kind of just YouTube-y, but
that's a good term.
That's a good point.
Well, thanks for...
Earnest, true to my feelings and authentic to myself, will show through into my work to be transmuted to other humans who are open to receive my message, who are able to connect my work in multiple organic living level in only way that a human can. A machine can emulate an artist after he or she has created, but never produce a new original, just a variation of the copy.
Sure. Well, thanks for sharing that, because I hadn't seen that comment, but that makes me feel like, okay, maybe I'm not totally speaking from ignorance here, because I'm no art buff whatsoever.
You're not totally crazy, Casey.
Yeah, I mean, that is what I see, though, and I mean, that is the whole point. It's not like, oh, a portrait shouldn't necessarily be, oh, look, you made an accurate depiction of it. You're showing this. They even said in his paintings he had to paint certain noble persons, and he had to paint them as being noble, as in they're rich and wealthy, but they were also understanding of the people's needs, and they also had a charitable look about them. So he had to paint this like duality of emotion. One last question, I promise, and then we'll get off this, unless you guys have a lot to say. But if you had an option, and I'm guessing I know what the answer would be, but if you had an option, okay, we can listen to an authentic Bach or one of these David Cope generated Bachs, people in general would choose the authentic Bach, correct?
I assume you would.
I assume you would. Actually, now I'm thinking you guys are the wrong crowd to ask.
But now I'm so curious.
It depends on.
Now we're like,
It could depend on who's performing it.
Yeah, it
sure,
would.
sure.
Yeah. Well, and something about when we were talking about this earlier, I think people enjoy watching, like knowing that another human has put their hands on whatever this is, that somebody else's human experiences in this, and like to take it to another, like other genres of art, I'd prefer to watch a great play than a movie. Always, because it seems like there's so much distance in a movie, and though I can love it and cry and something, whenever I go see a play, and you can usually tell within 15 minutes if it's going to be good or not, if you've got good actors and like well-crafted sets and staging, but like there have been several times in my life when I've been sitting in a play and I'll just start crying, even if it's a hilarious play. There's something about watching like all the talents and all the people together and like all of this energy working together that's just so joyful. I'll be like happy crying really embarrassingly
I'm way embarrassed.
in the house because it's just so cool, and it's like I want to watch people do that.
Well, and I think the point I was going to get around to, would people rather see or hear the authentic Bach or the replicant? I'm guessing it's the authentic, because I think a lot of why we go to these concerts and listen to these musics is what other people have said in the past. I'll just echo it again, is that you're like listening to a museum. We're preserving this thing from the past, and you're saying, oh, look, this is an actual piece, and oh, wow, I wonder what it was like back then, and oh, this is what it was like, and it's a historical appeal as well as a musical appeal.
Mm-hmm.
Megan, do you have any questions from Facebook?
I don't. I thought I did. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I told you. I didn't see any.
You're right, Casey.
So, but you do probably have a topic, I think.
I do have a topic, and I think our topics work so well together this week. And mine is kind of just one similar ideals, but a particular project, percussion project, and it's called the Gamelatron. Have any of you guys heard or seen this thing live before?
No, but I was really glad you posted the link because I checked it out.
Yeah, it's cool. And I saw this first maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. Our gamelan, actually the same one Baljinder was referring to before, Eastman's Gamelan Lila Mooney, we went and performed at the Smithsonian Museum. There was a Indonesian arts festival happening, and there are a lot of different gamelans, Javanese and Balinese, that traveled to the Smithsonian to take part in this festival. And the centerpiece, when you walked into kind of the gallery of gamelans, was this Gamelatron. And it was like, what is this thing? And it's this robotic gamelan ensemble. And I checked it out, I read about it, I listened to it, I didn't think a whole lot of it. And then I started looking online when I was searching for a topic and thinking, okay, what's going on with that? Is that still happening, or what's the story behind it? And found out that it has a really interesting story. It was created by Aaron Taylor Kuffner. He lives in New York, and he's the artistic director. The Gamelatron is a thing, but it's also, most importantly, an installation, and it's something that changes. It's a piece of art. So the mission is that it's the marriage of Indonesian ritual and sonic tradition with modern robotics. It's a malleable sound producing kinetic sculpture. It is a malleable sound-producing kinetic structure that innovatively brings the legacy and creative beauty of gamelan to new shores, new people, and new communities. So yeah, it takes traditional gamelan instruments that were handmade in Indonesia and applies this robotic thing that Aaron has developed and that he makes himself along with his team. But I think the really interesting part is that this installation moves to all different kinds of places, and not only as a piece of art changes. So for example, the shape of the way they set it up, the decor they use surrounding it, the space it is, the volume, the composition they decide to program into it. All these things change based on the space and the place. But I think this overall mission of bringing gamelan to places where it has never been before. For those of you, we've talked about gamelan on the podcast before, but it's not an easy thing to tote around, I mean, I loved my time studying gamelan and would love to do more, However, my current situation, you know, I think, okay, what would it take for me to get a gamelan at my school? We have to find a whole separate room for it. You know, it's a hard thing to do, and a lot of people in the States have brought gamelan ensembles to their institutions or their communities, which I think is a wonderful, wonderful. I have so much more respect for them now after looking into what it takes. So, but this Gamelatron can reach a whole new crowd of people. So it started in 2008. Aaron, as I said, Aaron is the artistic director. He was collaborating with Eric Singer and the League of Electronic Musical Urban Robots, and it has grown to having multiple sets installed around the world in galleries, museums, public spaces, retreat centers, festivals, and private residencies. I'm going to get arrested. A couple of interesting points are that every installation is customized to the architecture and intentions of the space, as I mentioned. I encourage you guys to get online and check out the website, because there's a whole gallery on the website of different artwork and exhibitions, installations, single-tone mindfulness sculptures that they've created. They document everything beautifully. Aaron composes original music that is rooted in classical gamelan, but also is a unique creation. So we'll program traditional pieces, but also his own compositions based on traditional gamelan. They're all the instruments are made by master craftsmen in Indonesia, and Aaron and his team hand make all the robotic mechanisms. They fabricate the electronics and do all the artistic detailing themselves. It's a slow process, but it's done with diligence and care, and now they have multiple sets of these that are constantly traveling throughout the world. So they see it as a tool, a resource, and an offering to humanity. So I think it's a project that it shows, it proves its value, you know, and it kind of lies in these things that we're talking about, within these things that we're talking about.
So it's basically a gamelan player piano.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I like that it can be in different art spaces and that it's an installation. And
yeah, I was really impressed. You guys got to check out the website. There's like just beautiful pictures of this thing. It's really cool.
See, now I think we're all really open-minded. We're talking about David Cope and this Rembrandt project, and now this thing that is a self-running gamelan. I feel like we're all really open-minded. None of this makes any of us mad because we've probably done a lot of things with electronics, and we've seen a lot of this. But man, some people this just infuriates. They're saying, "Hey, you're replacing people with machines," and and the more we give into that, the more soon nobody has a gig. And
yeah, that's the thing. Like, we have to adapt. We have to adapt to this, and I think embracing it, growing with, and the job market is changing at the exact same time. You know, more jobs are being created in other avenues that have become a thing because of these new technologies that are being invented, and others are drying up. You know.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is like it's happening whether you like it or not. So might as well embrace it. And I mean, look at tumblers. It's a great piece for marimba violin and electronics. Like it's not threatening a marimbist job to have tumblers in existence. You know.
Well, that's what I think too. I mean, I think of course it's bringing someone else who may have an interest in something else, and it's just merging two things can only be helpful to the two things. So yeah, I feel like a lot of musicians are split. Some people are like, no, play the rep. Classical music's dying. Stop. We can't afford to explore these new things. We can't afford to, replicate Bach. We need to work on, the real Bach is dying. We can't afford to do that. And yeah, I guess it's just simply a split opinion. Because
I think the argument about this being a replacement for humans is invalid on so many other levels. But one thing is that people who go to see what's it called, Gamelatron, someone who would go to check out the Gamelatron they're not going to look at to watch a device imitate what a person would do.
Yeah.
They're not going to experience an imitation performance. They're going to experience a totally different kind of performance. And the thing about the spectrum that I was talking about is like, the more that these electronic mechanical ensembles become popular and ubiquitous, the more our spectrum as artists is growing. It's not replacing, it's just adding something else that we have an opportunity to experience. There was also Actually, my first experience with gamelan was at the Bang on a Can Summer Festival. I was a fellow there in 2006, 10 years ago. So we premiered a piece for gamelan and robot ensemble, and there's a group at MIT called Ensemble Robot. That's an ensemble of robots that the engineers build. They all take MIDI inputs and they play, like, there's one that looks like a DNA. It's like a double helix, but it's all glockenspiel bars with little hammers, and you can write something in Finale and plug the MIDI into this thing and it'll play it. And but we did this big piece for robots and humans playing gamelan, and it was a really eye-opening experience for me. I mean, again, the robots weren't there to replace, because we couldn't find 4 or 5 other people to come play. It's because they were doing something that was totally non-human. It was a new instrument, really. And so as a composer, I view something like the Gamelatron as just being another instrument that I could possibly write for, and I could write a piece for violin and Gamelatron. It just widens the spectrum of possibilities of things that I can experience as a listener, but also as a creative artist, the things I can be involved in. And I think the folks who have the argument that it's replacing performers aren't backing up and seeing that the performers are still here. The spectrum is just being so wide that you don't always see them. You have to look, you have to explore, and certainly the combination of live, of human performers with electronics, whether it's computer or mechanical instruments like the Gamelatron, that's a really cutting edge thing that I think is very exciting to be able to collaborate with something like the Gamelatron as a percussionist. It would be a lot of fun.
Well, and I really like what Ben said. Whether they like it or not, this is happening, and it's like the MP3 and the record companies. They tried so hard to fight it, and it's proved to be totally not worth the fight. It's like, this is happening whether you like it or not. Kicking and screaming over it isn't gonna be anything but painful.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, like, when iTunes came along, it was so successful because everyone was pirating music anyway so easily. Right. It's like, well, might as well just charge for it and do it their way,
Megan, when you said Gamelatron, I imagined this, like, evil robot, like I am Gamelatron.
No.
Like a transformer.
Kind of looks like that, though.
What do you think his non-Gamelatron shape would be if he was a transformer?
Oh, I get it. All right.
What if he was like a treadmill? Because there's a treadmill over here.
What if he was a refrigerator?
Megan gets it.
Megan helps you out sometimes.
Yeah, she does.
On the podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm totally into sparkling water these days, you guys. I'm drinking all sparkling water.
So take some sparkling water and just mix juice and sparkling water. It's such a simple.
That's a good idea. It has like a little berry flavor in it, or sometimes I'll like put a raspberry in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna edit it to say, like, you guys, I'm just wasted right now. I'm studying for my exams. I'm drinking straight gasoline because it was the strongest thing I could find. Yeah. So, Baljinder, enough of this nonsense. What do you got? What do you got? What do you got coming up lately? What's on the immediate horizon for you? And tell us what you're going to be working on or currently working on, and what we should look out for.
Sure. Well, I'll start with what I just finished working on. I just finished a new marimba piece for Mike Burrid and a bunch of other percussionists, about 40 other people. Solo piece. It's about 9 minutes long. Just marimba. Believe it or not, it's my first solo marimba piece that's just for marimba, that doesn't use electronics or anything else. And I thought it was about time I should write one of those.
Is there a premiere set for that?
No, there isn't. Not that I know of. I'm supposed to meet with Mike this week. Mike, answer the phone this week, and we'll talk. So I just finished that. I finished a solo piece for Keith Aleo. I finished another percussion piece probably I just finished a flute and vibraphone piece last week. It's going to be premiered in a couple weeks or coming up at the Piccolo Spoleto Festival.
Did you do a solo cymbal piece for Keith? Were you on that list?
I did, but I didn't do a solo cymbal piece. I did a solo open instrumentation piece, so he could play it with cymbals if he wants.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So a big project I'm working on right now is a CD of my percussion music. I have so much percussion music that it's time to have my own CD, I think. I've had pieces on other people's CDs here and there. So anyway, there's a list of pieces that haven't been recorded commercially and so we're in the process of working on that. And I have finished recording 2 of the pieces. One is Refuge, which I think Megan's group did recently.
Yeah, we just did that.
One is Colored.
Got to put a huge props out for that piece, because I saw when I was teaching at Interlaken last summer, the students played that on one of the concerts, and I was just, I don't know, I was really blown away by it, and I wanted to do it all year, and so we finally did it in the spring. And yeah, we did it with handbells, and we did it with like there's an optional you can enter from off stage, and so we experimented with that. It was challenging, but I'm glad we did it. I think it added a really cool element to the concert.
That's great. I think your group's the only one that's entered while playing.
I gotta send you a video of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. There's another big piece called Colored Windows, Tempered Rooms that actually was the first piece I wrote the year Mike Burritt came to Eastman. I wrote a piece for the Eastman Percussion Ensemble that he premiered, and it hadn't been recorded commercially, so we've recorded those 2 pieces here with the McCormick Percussion Group. And then also on the CD, I'm going to Austin in a couple weeks and recording my percussion trio called Sun with Line Upon Line, and that's going to be on the CD. And I'm going to LA in July to record with the LA Percussion Quartet. We're doing we're doing Passageways with the LA Percussion Quartet, but with Dave Gerhardt playing the solo pan part, and he was the one who led the consortium commission for that. And then recording my marimba piece, my new marimba piece with Mike Burritt. So the CD should be pretty exciting. It'll have at least these 5 pieces that haven't been released commercially with Line Upon Line, Mike Burritt, LA Percussion Quartet, and the McCormick Group here. So that's a big project.
You know, you're covering such an interesting, wide group of people. That's really cool.
Yeah, I'm excited about that then.
For Passageways, you said it's LA Percussion Quartet. Are you playing the 5th percussion part, or is someone else?
No, somebody else is playing the 5th percussion part.
Do you know who yet?
I don't know who it is. I probably have it in an email, but honestly, I don't know. I'm going to conduct the recording session. So.
Well, if you don't want to conduct
I won't be playing.
Come out there. I'd love to go to LA.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I know the piece.
So.
He's always trying to get
that's right.
Ben's just like.
My goal is just to get to LA, basically. That's all I'm doing here. I got the job in Texas, so I'm going to be halfway there.
Yeah, right. Percussion CD is a big project. I'm excited about that. I'm doing a saxophone CD also that'll come about a year later after the percussion CD. If anyone watching this is interested in finding out about this commissioning platform, we have this commissioning platform called Global Premiere. That's a commissioning platform where a composer writes a piece for like a typical consortium commission, but all the performers are in a different state each and a different country outside of the U.S. And so I just finished a piece for this platform that I'm really excited about. It's a piece called Sonata of Puzzles. It's a piece for saxophone and piano. And so this piece was written for a wide range, a geographically diverse anyway, group of saxophonists, where we had selected a saxophonist from each state in several countries outside the U.S., so they're all representing this consortium. And the saxophonists who were involved are just killer players. So I'm really excited to write for them. That piece will be on my saxophone CD.
So you say I'm going to write this piece for this instrumentation, and then you go out and find all the people?
No, actually, it's a
the website's
globalpremiere.org. The website's called globalpremiere.org, so you could check it out later. But this started off because of my piece Gradient, there were lots of saxophonists asking to commission pieces from me, fortunately for me. So I never had time to do it, but ultimately Doug O'Connor also had said sometimes we need to get a new piece from you. And I said, well, actually, there's all these other people who want one. Let's do a consortium. And so it started off normal, let's just do a consortium. But through talking with Doug, we were talking about ways that we could carry out the consortium commission different than the typical email blast, see how many people join, here's how much it costs, that kind of thing. So what we did was we decided to one thing that consortia don't offer performers typically is some level of exclusivity for people, unless there's a lead consortium member. But we wanted to be able to create something that wouldn't just benefit the composer, but benefits also the performers and the performers playing all the piece. So we did this thing where we decided, why don't we identify the performers we want to be involved and privately invite them to join it as representatives of their territory. So then Tim McAllister could give the Illinois premiere, and Cliff Leeman could give the South Carolina premiere, so they'd all get some level of exclusivity here.
Right.
And so we did this. We developed this online thing with a map where the states change colors when people join. You can hover and click to go to the performers' websites, and it turned into a really great thing for me. So we recently opened up the platform to get other composers involved.
That's really cool. I like that. I love this idea. We had Amy Garapik on last week, and she was talking about her project, her Worldwide Vexations project, where she had, numerous performers playing Vexations at different parts of the world, and it was kind of similar. You could click on the map and see where these performances were happening. I love that idea, and I think that technology makes this so, well, sometimes complicated, but possible. And it's just, I don't know, it's a cool thing, I think, that wasn't possible before this global... This particular project was such a huge benefit to me. I mean, it really took off. People were joining, great people I never would have connected with or wrote for, and or it would have taken a long time to get to that point. So the idea that this consortium, when I finish the piece, all these top-level players start playing it right away, it's sort of like the goal for a piece is to get it into the hands of these people. Well, it starts off with them, and so then lots of other people want to play this piece too, and it's really exciting. Right. And so we have a call for proposals right now proposals have been trickling in for composer and performer teams who want to do this thing like I did together, and we're going to have the website and we have all the infrastructure to do it. And so we're going to pick about 2 people now. Then we're going to do another call in November. And so the idea is that we'll have these global premiere pieces being commissioned and premiered.
I just wanted to say really quickly, I wanted to give Baljinder a compliment because, like I said, we did Passageways here, and then I looked at his website to check out some of his other music, and I have to say, of all the composers I've ever seen, he has maybe the best scores. Like, very incredibly well engraved, and everything about Passageways, it wasn't easy by any means, but everything about the piece just worked. You could tell that every single note was very intentionally thought out, every single stick change and everything like that, it all just worked so well. So that's so rare to find as a percussionist, a composer that really just can make a piece completely work on paper. So my hat's off to you for that.
Cool. Thanks so much. Thank you. It was actually all an algorithm that wrote that stuff.
Yeah, algorithmic stick changes.
Yeah, that's right.
Inconvenient.
My computer's learned all of
them. Yeah.
He's actually not real. His parents just created an algorithm and called it Baljinder.
That was weird.
Baljinder
That was weird, man.
Yeah, there you go. Tying it all together.
Yep.
All right, so Game of Thrones, episode 6 tonight, I think. 7, 6, something like that. Baljinder, thanks so much for joining us, man. That was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was great.
Yep, you're welcome. You're welcome. Megan, Ben, take it easy. We'll catch you on episode 47.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Thanks, Baljinder.
Cool. All right, thanks.
Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.